Let's continue. Now let's do the controllers, right? Let's put them each one in its own file, right? It's a good practice to have a single file only deal with one responsibility, right? It's again our we're following the practice, a good practice of isolating responsibilities, right? Making sure again to deal with complexity. If you're looking at one file, it should only do one thing, do it well, and nothing else. Okay, so let's do the login controller first. So let me save this as, and I'll name it. As I mentioned earlier, a naming convention that we're going to be following is that we're going to first give it the name of its responsibility, right? So it deals with logging in, and then the rest of the naming convention is what is its role in the overall architecture of our application? It's a controller, so that's its role, right? In the application, it's a controller, meaning we already know that there should be a template that's associated with this, right? Some HTML is associated with this controller. We know that it can handle some events from that template. We know that it can provide data to the template. Yes. That name controller immediately should bring about what its responsibilities are, right? Okay, so all the event handlers from the view, perhaps getting data from some service, right? Providing that data back to the templates, right? And running some logic. So we know that it has that role. The other one is that we're going to go here. We're going to use here for the naming convention is client. Where is this file executed? Right? Where in the architecture, in the stack, right? In the technology stack, where is this being executed? Right? And client tells us that this is a file that is solely being executed on the browser. The browser is responsible for executing this file. It's not executing on the server. Okay. A controller could also be on the server. A controller could be in either place, right? If you're talking about previous legacy applications, typically controllers were on the server, right? They were responsible for intercepting incoming URLs from form submissions, right? Or somebody clicking on a URL, right? And so they were either a servlet or there was some server-side artifact that received these events from the user URLs, and then did ran something in the back end, access maybe some data, retrieve something in the data, and then provide data back to decided what HTML or PHP or next page you would see, and then it would render it and then send it back. Here it's doing almost the same things, right? It's receiving data events, but instead it's being done right on the browser. Right, either through on-click, on-drag, or things like that, event handling on the client side, and it's providing data for the view. So this immediately places us where it is. Notice that it starts with something very specific, then a little bit more generic, right, and then the top-level generic part of where does it fit in our architecture. Yes? Right? There it is. So there's login controller. From everything else, because I moved it to another file, I'm going to remove it from here. So I'm going to remove it from here, and I'm going to remove the login controller from here as well. So I'm going to remove that. If I go back to the login controller, I am going to remove the profile controller, because this is only the login controller, yes? So I'll remove the profile controller from here. I only have the login controller here. Everybody okay? Right? And since we have this new controller, I'm going to load it from our index page. And it's the login controller. There it is. And then everything else. Right? If we refresh the page and go back to the login, let's see, we refresh login, and if we go to Alice and Alice, it should look up that user in the array, right? And if it finds it, it navigates to the profile controller. So this is still working, right? It hasn't changed. So the behavior is the same. We're only doing some cleanup, Right? We're only doing some cleanup and good practices on organizing ourselves around an ever-growing, more complex application. Yes? All right. So we did that with the login. Let's do that for the profile controller. Now, if we look at everything else, the only thing left in the profile in the everything else file is just the profile controller. That's all that it's left here, right? So we can safely rename this. Everything else, we'll rename it instead, right, as profile. So that's its main responsibility. It's a controller, and it's on the client. Everybody okay? All right. And since we renamed that, we'll have to rename it in our index page. We'll rename this as profile controller. Let's refresh. Okay, the profile controller seems to be working. Everybody good? All right. So we broke off all the controllers into their own files. All right. All right. So let's. But notice that our files have been growing. Right. Ever more files, ever more templates, ever more. So this is getting out of hand. So we'll need to reorganize a little bit ourselves on how we organize the file system a little bit. So let's do that next.